Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's time to make the preseason projections for the Timberwolves season. I'll give you my Timberwolves win total projection for this season, plus where they'll finish in the Western Conference, the overall Western Conference standings finish, all those predictions, plus a couple of other team-specific or individual player-specific predictions are all coming on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy just over 24 hours, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, until opening night for the Wolves. I guess happy NBA opening day with a couple of games going on here tonight. Today on the show, plenty to talk about, but this is the projection podcast. I'm going to give my final Timberwolves win total projection for the season. So it's a big show today. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. A reminder that you can now watch this podcast on Roku and on Amazon Fire TV through the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. You can watch Locked On Wolves, Locked On Vikings, Twins, Wild, Gophers, all the Locked On shows in Minnesota today on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. All right. I've been beating around the bush related to a specific Timberwolves win projection all offseason long, and I was waiting until today to reveal it, wanting to make sure we had everything in place. We knew which teams had which rosters, or make sure there weren't any last-minute big moves, and I'm ready to reveal what I think the Wolves will do. For some context, last season, a lot of people had the Wolves between 40 and 42 wins, hovered around 500. I predicted the Wolves would have 44 wins. I thought their best case was a 46-win season. Their worst case was a 40-win season, and I took 44 as my win total. They ended up winning 46, so right on line with my best case. I just undershot it, but I will say that I was more optimistic than most of the projection models, most of the folks at the preseason rankings out there, and sure enough, the Wolves were even better than what I thought the most likely scenario was. This year, I think we're in a similar situation. And I'm not gonna beat around the bush anymore today. I'm gonna give you my Timberwolves win total projection now, and then build my case for it, go through the Western Conference as a whole, and that'll be the show here today, plus a couple of other predictions as we get through the show regarding individual players on the Wolves. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves will win 52 games this season and finish 52-30 in the Western Conference. That puts them, and I'll reveal my full rankings later in the show where I think they'll sit in the Western Conference standings. But if they win 50-plus games, they're going to be certainly in the top at least 5, if not higher than that. For some context, last season, let's see, 52 wins. The Mavs won 52 games and finished 4th in the West. Golden State had 53 wins and were 3rd in the West. Of course, both of them outperformed the two teams ahead of them in the standings and in the seedings in the Western Conference in the playoffs, going to the conference finals, and in the case of the Warriors, obviously beyond. So 52 wins, and here's why. So, if you look, the BetOnline win total over-unders have the Wolves, I believe, still at 48.5, and you better believe that I took the over on that pretty early on in the offseason. And a lot of the 538 and the ESPN forecast and places like that have the Wolves finishing right around that mark. And in fact, let me pull it up real quick here. 538, which I think is usually one of the more accurate projection models, has the Wolves at 47 wins this season. So under the Vegas over-under, well under my 52 wins, and only a game better than last season. ESPN forecast has them at 49 wins, so just over the 48.5 at BetOnline for the win total for the season, below my 52, and only 3 games ahead of last year's 46 win total. Here's why I think this is. Without diving into the minute, and of course the formulas aren't entirely out there, but some of the players the Wolves sent out, and namely Patrick Beverley and Jared Vanderbilt, both do extremely well in all advanced metrics. They both rate out well in win shares, in real plus minus and any of the box score metrics for a couple of reasons. They're both very good defensively. They get a lot of steals. That matters quite a bit. Offensive rebounding grades well. Vanderbilt is a good offensive rebounder. There's a number of those kind of like the do stuff numbers, right? The extra stuff that they both did really well with. And Vando, had a good shooting percentage around the rim. Patrick Beverley could shoot threes. Like these guys did things that obviously were positive and they impact the game in a positive way. And that's why their individual numbers were so good. And in the aggregate, that affects the overall projection for the team. And that's why I think the models say, okay, you got rid of two really good players in terms of advanced stats, and you replace them with basically one in Rudy Gobert. Now, Kyle Anderson also rates out well, which is why I think it's a little weird that these projections are still a bit low, because Gobert and Kyle Anderson are both advanced. Kyle Anderson, I wouldn't say is advanced stat darling. He rates out well in most of these metrics. Rudy Gobert is an advanced stat darling. We heard around the time of the trade, Mark Lowry's a big win shares guy. That's a phrase that kept being repeated. I think John Krasinski said it on a couple of podcast appearances that he loves win shares. And of course, Rudy just kills win shares. Karl-Anthony Towns is awesome in win shares as well. And there's a time and a place for win shares, and they matter. But they also sent out a couple of guys that do really well in that category too, in Vanderbilt and Beverly. So that's why some of these projection models are only giving them a little bit of a tick upwards, because you're sending out guys and replacing them with a guy who, according to advanced metrics, are going to have similar impacts. Now, this is where we have to use the basketball acumen to kind of dig into this a bit deeper, because it's not apples to apples. And I don't like the phrase human element, really, because I just think that gets used a lot for people that want to completely ignore advanced metrics, which absolutely matter in every sport. But like you hear it a lot in baseball and basketball, the human element, et cetera. But there's nuances within the game of basketball that really matter. From a roster construction standpoint, there are reasons why Rudy Gobert makes more sense than Jared Vanderbilt. A lot of reasons. And even though Jared Vanderbilt rates out really well from an advanced metric perspective, no one's going to argue he's a better player than Rudy Gobert. That would be insane. Rudy and what he provides, for instance, this is the easiest example. The Timberwolves were one of the worst 2 or 3 defensive rebounding teams in the entire league last year. It's the only reason, really, that their defense didn't rank higher than, I think they finished, 13th maybe in defensive rating. It was between 12 and 14, depending on which site you look at. The defense would have been top 10 if they had rebounded average. Defensive rebounding is a massive part of defense, right? The only way that you can end an opponent's possession is a defensive rebound off a missed shot, a made shot, or a turnover. So the Wolves force turnovers really well. They block shots really well. They grab steals really well. But they gave up a ton of offensive rebounds, and they couldn't end possessions in that way. They also fouled a lot too, which is another way that you can end a possession, is by allowing the opponent to make free throws, right? A bad way to end a possession if you're the defense. So they've now taken one of the league's worst defensive rebounding teams and added the best defensive rebounder in the league in Rudy Gobert. And it also allows them to play, and this is something that doesn't show up in these numbers, to play a different scheme defensively. They don't have to play this ultra-aggressive, blitzing, high-wall, pick-and-roll scheme where you're rushing the perimeter and trying to force turnovers. That falls apart against well-coached teams that can pass the ball, teams that have figured out what you're doing defensively and have the ability to throw a skip pass. That it's not hard to beat a blitzing defense if you're well-coached and you have players that are smart and know how to pass the ball and know how to read a defense. Which is why against good teams, late in the season, in the playoffs, the blitzing, the high wall scheme kind of fell apart. They were top 10 defensively for much of the season. It didn't hold up late in the season for those reasons. Now you can play a drop pick and roll coverage. You can mix in high wall if you want. You can switch. You got a bunch of switchable players, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, among others, Kyle Anderson. But they can play a different scheme, and they can add the best rim protector and the best defensive rebounder in the league. That matters more than simply shipping out 2 really good advanced metric guys in Beverly and Vanderbilt. I'm oversimplifying that, but you know what I mean. Vanderbilt and Beverly, and you're bringing in one in Rudy. It doesn't just cancel out, because you're allowed to do other things then. You're not only improving your specific weaknesses, defensive rebounding, rim protection are the 2 biggest ones, but you're also, from a basketball standpoint that doesn't show up in these numbers, allowing yourself flexibility to play different coverages. And that matters. And that doesn't show up in these projections. That's why I have the Timberwolves at 52 wins this season instead of the 47, 48, 49 that all these projection models and the line at Bet Online, all these people have. because we're not taking into account that. There's also something else that those numbers aren't taking into account, and I want to hit that here next. First, though, let's talk about our friends, relatively new friends, over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's really simple to create a job post. You create a job post, you add the job, the purple hashtag hiring frame gets added to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. We're quickly approaching the end of the year. We're like 10 weeks away from New Year's Eve, basically, at this point. It's time to finish the year strong, to find the absolute best team member that might help you do that for your business. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now I'll make your second listen, the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, I've already gotten on my soapbox a bit about why the projection models are underrating the Timberwolves. I have a couple more reasons. So, again, I have the Wolves at 52 wins. 538 has them at 47. ESPN has them at 49. BetOnline has them at 48.5 wins. I took the over, obviously, with 52. So the main reason is we're not taking into account the improvement in specific areas, rebounding, defensive rebounding, rim protection, and also the ability to play different schemes, which does not show up in these numbers. Another thing that surely is taken into account by some of this, right? Because these, like, for instance, Vegas knows what they're doing. BetOnline knows what they're doing. They're looking at the total number of teams in the West, which teams are tanking, which teams aren't, like that whole thing. But I think anecdotally, we're going to have some of these tanking teams that are even worse than we expect them to be. It's so hard to project that because we don't know. And I know some of these do take into account injury attrition, right? Teams that are, you better believe Vegas considers this, teams that are more likely to have players or have players that are more likely to be injured based on their track records, etc. Teams that are likely to rest guys. So, for instance, the Thunder, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a really good player. He hasn't played in preseason. How much is he really going to play this year as Oklahoma City doesn't have Chet Holmgren? Like, wouldn't mind adding Wembanyama to the mix next year as a draft pick, right? So there's some of these that, like, it's really hard to parse. But I just think, because I think it's hard to project, we are underselling how bad some of these teams are going to be. I mean, Oklahoma City and Houston would be the two biggest culprits. San Antonio is not going to be good either. They're kind of, it appears with the DeJounte Murray trade, they're kind of going the stealth. No, not stealth. Less stealth, more Oklahoma City route, where, like, hey, let's just kind of mail this thing in and accrue a bunch of draft picks along the way. So you're looking at, the Thunder are probably the worst. Houston's going to be second worst team in the West. I'm tipping off my actual rankings here. I'll get to in a minute, or Western Conference projection. And then the Spurs, they're all going to be guilty of this. And how guilty will they be? I mean, like, could we end up with, like, what was it? The Nets in, like, 2009 that won, like, 11 games or something crazy, 12 games. I don't know that we'll end up with a team like that, but the top of the Western Conference is so good that it's not out of the question. I mean, like, the fact that, like, we're looking at this thing and there's people that think the Wolves will finish 7th in the West, which is just insane to me. Like, there's no way the Wolves finish 7th in the West, barring catastrophic injury, which better not happen. I just don't see them finishing 7th, but that's how good the West is. And there's a middle of the West that has some, teams that could swing either way. I mean, I look at Portland with Damian Lillard and his health and not much depth behind him. New Orleans is going to be better than them, obviously, with Zion, but there's some teams that could swing either way. They could all of a sudden be 48 win teams, or they may be in the 20s, like Portland last year. People thought Portland was the 6th or 7th best team in the West. Dame gets hurt. They win 27 games. And I don't know that roster is much better this year around him. So and the Lakers are another example of that. If they stay healthy and do Lakers things and add some guys midseason or whatever that might be, if LeBron can play, that's probably an above 500 team. But they won 33 games last year and missed the play-in. So like these things are on the table with some of these middle tier teams. I just think that there's enough of this bottom of the West that's just going to be atrocious, and enough of the top of the West is going to be really good. I guess the theory, maybe is that the teams at the top beat up on each other enough that it kind of cancels out, winning. Like the Wolves won 4 games against, I was looking at this for my Thunder preview tomorrow. The Wolves beat the Thunder all 4 times last year easily. That should happen against the Thunder. It should happen against the Rockets. It should happen against the Spurs. They should be like 12-0 against those teams, or 11-1 or whatever. But like, I guess the theory then on the flip side is maybe you are 500 against the teams that are as good or better than you. And it all evens out. But I just think that we're underselling, like I said earlier, we're underselling the gaps that are being filled. Another example of this would be Jared Vanderbilt. Like, I love the guy. I think he's fantastic. I've been singing his praises since before he was even a rotation player. I think he's a fantastic role player in the NBA. The guy does not have good hands currently, unless they've vastly improved over the offseason and given the trade to Utah. He can't catch the basketball. He had at least 1 turnover a game, some games more than that, where he just dropped the ball out of bounds or it clanged off his hands and went to the opposing team. In the one preseason game that Rudy played with Karl-Anthony Towns, we saw him make 2 or 3 really tough catches in traffic that surprised him. He wasn't expecting the ball. He said as much post-game to the media that like, hey, I didn't get the ball in some of these situations in Utah. I was surprised at how much they were looking for me. The Wolves are looking for their massive 7'2" center with just gigantic hands and a huge wingspan under the basket. And Vanderbilt, like, it was just kind of like, okay, fine, we got to pass it to Vando. Nobody's guarding him, but they're so worried he's not going to catch the ball that, like, when he did catch the ball, he was fine around the rim, especially given his size, but his hands weren't good enough. And Rudy's got better feel too. Obviously the roll gravity, that's a whole other conversation. We talked about it extensively on the show, but there's so many things that he does that, yes, Vando is an advanced stats darling. And yes, Patrick Beverley is an advanced stats darling. And yes, it's going to hurt to lose some of the depth and lose all the draft picks and all that stuff. But sitting here right now, adding Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson for that matter, and having the deep bench depth, you're not relying on Austin Rivers like some, the Knicks did a couple of years ago where like, hey, he gets overextended and yeah, he can average 15 points, but he's not efficient, etc. He has defensive lapses. Bryn Forbes, you're not relying on these guys to be rotation players. That's depth. Rivers and Forbes are your 10th, 11th, 12th guys. That's how deep this team is. They have more depth than last year. They have a far better anchor to the defense, obviously, in Rudy Gobert. And yes, it hurts to lose Beverly. Yes, it hurts to lose Vanderbilt. But they more than replaced them and made up for it on the basketball side. That doesn't always show up in some of these projection systems. Okay, I want to close the show with my Western Conference, where I think everybody will sit in the West. So stay tuned for that. We're going to do that here next to close the show. All right, Western Conference standings. I got the Wolves at 52 wins. So here's what I think that means in the West. I think Golden State still wins the Western Conference. I know things are rocky, but I mean, Jordan Poole got its extension. Like they'll be all right. I think Golden, and also it's important to point out that like last year, I was way low on Golden State and I messed up. If you go back and listen, I think I had them barely making the playoffs last year. They finished 3rd in the West and obviously won the title. They had a fantastic season. So I missed there. I think they'll be the best team in the West this year. There's always, maybe they don't finish first simply because they can pace themselves a bit, which is, I think, what they did at times last year. They obviously had injury issues, but who didn't? But I've got them 1. I've got Denver 2. It all depends on how Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray come back and how they play. I think, I really like Michael Porter Jr., but how many games has he actually, done it for, quote unquote? Like, how many games has he actually been what we think he can be? And then, of course, the injury last year. Jamal Murray hasn't played in 20 months, something like that. So there are question marks there, but Jokic is so good. And the fact that they won, what did they win? 48 games last year and finished 6th in the West, avoiding the play-in, with no Jamal Murray and basically no Michael Porter Jr., like what could they do with, say those guys are 65% of what they have been in the past? That's a really good team. And I think they finished second in the West. I think Denver's fantastic. I think Michael Malone's fantastic. I have the Clippers third. This is the team that a lot of people think, we're seeing in these offseason polls, like winning the title, because the idea of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George healthy together is tantalizing. But and they're deep and they've got a good coach in Ty Lue, and I wonder about some of the meshing there. I also wonder about injuries with both of those guys. Historically speaking, that neither of them is going to play an entire season or anything close to that. So I think when they play, they're going to be fantastic, which is they're going to be a handful in the playoffs for sure. But I have them third in the West. And I have your Minnesota Timberwolves fourth in the Western Conference with 52 wins. I have them ahead of Phoenix, ahead of Memphis, ahead of Dallas. Again, we're talking regular season. Look at last year's regular season finish. Phoenix and Memphis were 1-2. Golden State and Dallas, who ended up in the conference finals, were 3-4. Then Utah, Denver, Timberwolves, Pelicans, Clippers, Spurs. So, well, and you could do the same thing in the East as well, by the way. I guess the Celtics finished second, but Miami was first in the East, and their season didn't finish the way they wanted it to. So in terms, and of Utah is the best example of this. Throughout Rudy's time in Utah, they had the best regular season record in the Western Conference over the past either 5 or 6 years, I think 5 years. And they never got past the second round. So it's a separate conversation to worry about that related to the Timberwolves, because like eventually that's a thing. But right now I'm talking about the regular season. This will be a good regular season team. There are teams, and we'll talk about this on Wednesday's show with the Thunder. The Thunder don't have anybody like near 7 feet tall. They got to deal with Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns. I mean, Mike Muscala, not your traditional big. Alexei Pokasevsky, yeah, he's over 7 feet, but he doesn't play like a big. What are they going to do about Rudy and Karl-Anthony Towns? And I mean, that's maybe not a great example because the Wolves should beat them 4 times regardless. But like there's teams that cannot deal at all with the Timberwolves size and may not have enough shooting to truly spread the floor and beat the Wolves playing 5 out on the other end of the floor, or on, put the Wolves on defense and spread them out in 5 out like teams did to the Jazz last year. So I think that like in the regular season, the Wolves should beat all these tanking teams. Even these really good teams, like the Wolves are going to win their fair share of games against good teams in the regular season because the Wolves have the depth, they have the size, they can play a variety of different ways. They really want to play small. They can. I mean, Karl-Anthony Towns, they were a 46 win team last year with Towns at center. So like you could do that, right? I don't know. I think they're going to be a fantastic regular season team, and I don't think 52 wins and the 4th spot in the West is crazy at all. I think Phoenix will be 5. I think their star is dimming a little bit. Chris Paul's getting up there in years. There's the DeAndre Ayton stuff, the Jay Crowder stuff. I think they're still really good, and they've got a great coach, and they've kind of been there, done that, especially in the regular season. What they win last year, an insane number of games, 64 games, 64 and 18 last year. So, I've got them 5 in the West. I've got Memphis 6. I promise this isn't like a grudge that I'm holding against Memphis for losing the playoffs last year. I've talked a lot about how Memphis is overrated the past couple of weeks. I mean that. I don't think we're going to get like a Hawks conference finals to out of the playoffs thing like we got a couple of years ago. But I think it's more Hawks than it is Suns. Remember when the Suns were a surprise conference finals team a couple of years ago, and then they maintained themselves and won 64 games last year? I think Memphis is more Hawks than they are Suns. And here's why. Jaren Jackson Jr. isn't going to play until at least Christmas. Kyle Anderson's gone. D'Anthony Melton's gone. This is a thinner team than it was last year. They're relying a lot on draft picks, and they've drafted extremely well. Desmond Bane, Xavier Tillman, on and on and on. They've drafted very, very, very well, but they're also relying on guys they drafted this year, on rookies. Even if they're older rookies, they're still rookies. I think Taylor Jenkins is a good coach, but I don't think he's Monty Williams. I don't think he's Ty Lue. I don't think he's Michael Malone. I don't think he's Steve Kerr. I think over the course of the season, all those things add up a little bit, and the depth isn't quite there. You're going to have to reintegrate Jaren Jackson Jr. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to not be in foul trouble. They're a very good team. I have them 6. I have them getting out of the play-in, not being in the play-in in the Western Conference. But I don't think they're quite what people think they're going to be. And John Morant's also got to stay healthy and maintain what he did last year. I know that they were very good when he was hurt last season. But still, I don't have them. I have them 6 in the West. Dallas have plummeting to 7. Well, plummeting is maybe a strong way to say that. They finished 4th last season with 52 wins, but no Jalen Brunson. They're thinking Christian Wood will, I guess, backfill some of those points that Brunson scored last year. I think there was some fluky stuff that went in the Mavs' favor last year. Honestly, Jason Kidd, there's still some question marks there. Defensively, we'll see if they can do what they did last year. Luke is incredible. He is the reason why they could get out of the play-in, but I have them 7. And you could flip Memphis and Dallas, and I wouldn't be upset about that. But I have them 7. Somebody's got to be 7 in the West. Some people have the Wolves. I have the Mavericks at 7. I have the New Orleans Pelicans at 8 in the Western Conference. This is probably the biggest wildcard team because a healthy Zion being what people think he can be, plus CJ McCollum, plus Brandon Ingram, this could be a top 4 seed. I am hesitant to believe that you're going to get 75 games out of Zion. Maybe that's just me being a skeptic, but that plus having to integrate him, CJ McCollum and Zion haven't played together. Like I think that they will be good. I think they'll be 8th in the West, but the variance here is very wide. They could be a non-playoff team. They could be a top 4 seed. You could convince me in any of those directions, but I have them 8 to kind of split the difference. I've got Portland at 9 because I think Damian Lillard is still fantastic. I don't love the rest of the roster at all, but be interested to see how Chauncey Billups does. But I've got them 9, and I've got the Lakers at 10. I just think it's either the Lakers or Sacramento, right? Those are your options at that point, basically. And I think the Lakers will have enough to do it. I think LeBron and whatever else, Patrick Beverly improves them in some ways that they needed improvement. I think they're a just maybe kind of like the Spurs, an under 500 play-in type team, this season. And then after that, I've got the Kings. Then I forgot about the Jazz earlier. I have the Kings. I didn't actually write these down in an order, but I'll say the Kings are 11. I wrote down the top 10. I didn't write down 11 through 15. I'll put the Kings at 11. And then I'll go Utah actually at 12. I think Utah is going to be better than the Spurs, the Thunder, and the Rockets, even though they've got a weird mix of parts. I think their coach will be good. I think that you've got some guys that have some pride and still want to win games. Now, these last 4 teams, you could really put them in any order. I don't think any of them will be good. I'd put the Spurs at the what is that, 12th? Yeah. And then, or 13th. And then I would go Rockets and then Thunder as the worst team in the West. I think both the Rockets and Thunder may struggle to win 20 games this year. I think that's entirely on the table given the incentive to tank and the lack of NBA talent ready right now, NBA talent on those rosters. And we'll talk a lot more about the Thunder on Wednesday show as we preview that first game of the season. All right, so there's your Western Conference standings. I did not get to my individual predictions for the season about Wolves players, my bold predictions. We'll do that Wednesday. We'll do Thunder preview and bold predictions for the season on Wednesday's show. So make sure to tune in. That show will post first thing Wednesday morning, and we'll get you ready. Wednesday night, we will do a live postcast about 45 minutes after the game. Have a very special guest. I don't know if I'm 100% allowed to announce it yet. I'll see if I can announce it at Wednesday's show, but somebody you're very familiar with, if you follow the Timberwolves and watch their broadcasts on Bally, we'll have a guest live postcast. The plan is for every game this year, 45 minutes following the final horn. We'll also do a full post-game podcast that we'll record and post late Wednesday, early Thursday. So all that coverage is upcoming. So really 3 shows Thursday, Wednesday. The Wednesday show in the morning, the live postcast to be about 10 minutes. That'll post 45 minutes after the final horn. And then you'll get your full post-game pod that will serve as Thursday's show, but we'll post late Wednesday into Thursday. So a busy Wednesday to be sure. Make sure you're following and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also, of course, watch on YouTube. I said this on yesterday's show, but I just moved this background. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be different here later this week. We're going to get that all set up, so get excited for that. I know it'll keep you coming back to the show on YouTube for sure. You can also listen on all of your favorite any of your favorite audio platforms. You can follow on Twitter at Lockdown T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. You can download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, absolutely free. You can also listen to any of the other Locked On Sports Minnesota shows on that app. Again, Roku or Amazon Fire TV. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. You can make your second listen today, Locked On NBA. The NBA season is here, and our local NBA experts and insiders have you covered on and off the court all season long. All the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. I was on Locked On NBA show Monday reviewing Rudy and Kat playing together last Friday. So go check out Monday's Locked On NBA if you want to hear that segment. That show, Locked On NBA, is available on YouTube, Odyssey, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.